Well, everybody, welcome to another Summer of Cyber event here today. We have an exciting talk today with Abigail Deras and Ramon Garo on DFIR, or Digital Forensics and Incident Response. I'm going to tell you, for me, this is a very, very interesting because I started my career 30 years ago in forensics. But back then, all we had was disk forensics. So that's all we did, analyze disks for information. So this is a great presentation. I hope you guys will get something out of it. This is an exciting part of the field. And again, Abby and Ramon, thank you very much for doing and giving some of your Saturday for this.
Thank you. All right, so everyone, thank you very much for joining Abby and myself this Saturday afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. So as you mentioned, I mean, basically this is an introduction to DFIR. You know, we called it "What is DFIR? Digital Forensics and Incident Response." So for the session, we're going to be providing a high-level overview of digital forensics and incident response and discuss free tools that can be used to conduct forensic investigations, incident response, as well as discuss the important skills that are necessary to find employment in the field, to be successful in the field, grow your skills in the field. And we're also going to talk about resources that you can use to learn more, you know, practicing skills, downloading tools, watching presentations, all that good stuff. So the agenda for today is we're going to be talking about, introducing ourselves, Abby and my background a bit, talking to you a little bit about, at a very high level, what is digital forensics and incident response, kind of what does that term mean, what is involved in the field, a little bit about the history of DFIR, specializations within DFIR, because even though we talk about it like one field, there are specialized directions you can take within DFIR. And like I mentioned before, we're going to talk about key skills, both the soft skills, the technical skills, discussing some tools that you can get started with, and really, most of the tools that we're going to be mentioning are free tools, so that, it's stuff that you can use to practice. And honestly, well, I'll talk about that when we get there, but I myself use a lot of free tools when I do, DFIR for my job. And at the end, we have a slide with a lot of resources, links that you can use to learn more. And obviously, we're going to leave some time at the end for questions and discussion, if hopefully if you all, have anything you want to ask about throughout the presentation. So, Abby.
Yep, I can go ahead and introduce myself. So my name is Abigail Deras, or Abigail as my full name. And I'm a cybersecurity engineer at Qualcomm. I focus on digital forensics, e-discovery, and internal investigation. Primarily, background was in host-based forensics, so Windows, but I do dabble a little bit in mobile forensics as well. Prior to this, I was actually a trained archaeologist, and I served as a ethnographic object conservator, worked in a lot of libraries and museums, and then pivoted into this field. Cool.
Thanks, Abby. And then myself, my name is Ramon Garo. I am currently a manager of incident response analyst at IBM for the CSERT team, which is Cybersecurity Incident Response Team. And like Abby, the start of my career was also not in digital forensics. I majored in school in mechanical engineering and did that for a few months before I kind of pivoted back to cybersecurity, because I was working in the information security office. Back then it was called information security at the university, but I liked cyber better, so I went back after dabbling in engineering for a little while. Me and my team, we do a lot of incident response. So that can involve host-based forensics, kind of like what Eric was alluding to at the beginning. Disk forensics. It can be memory forensics. It can be analysis of host activity via EDR, looking at SIM logs, firewall logs. So it can involve a lot of stuff, including host-based forensics. So at a high level, both Abby and myself work in the private sector for digital forensics. But whether we're talking about digital forensics, in the public sector, the private sector, it's a skill set that involves, it's a science that involves preserving, collecting, and analyzing digital data. So specifically, we're talking about any kind of information that is going to be found in digital media, like hard drives, maybe DVD drives, USB flash drives, all that type of stuff. The output of what we do in DFIR can be applied to legal investigations, private investigations, corporate investigations, which is, that last one is where Abby and I spend our time working on. It can be in cyber incident response, so it's not always necessarily an investigation of that could be for legal or criminal purposes, but it might be just for protecting an organization against an ongoing cyber incident, which is kind of that last bullet there. So, that's at a very high level. I mean, it's a fairly evolved field now, but it's existed for a while. I mean, Eric even mentioned he started doing this 30 years ago. So even though it's a very niche field, but it has been around for quite a while. Abby, do you have anything you'd like to add related to that?
Not with this, but regarding how long it's been around. With our next slide, we're gonna do a quick overview about that. Yeah. So, well, it is a very niche field. That it started off in the FBI around the 70s and 80s. They're the ones who first created the computer analysis and response team. And the reason we talk about the history of that is because it's important to understand and build that foundation. A lot of the tools and the skill sets that we work around and the knowledge we gain is rooted and based in the things that were created and developed by the police department and the FBI. One highlight that I like to call out is that in 1986, Cliff Stoll's Cuckoo's Egg. This is really important, especially if you're interested in digital forensics. That came out, and that really spoke about how digital forensics evolved and how it became what it is today. And it's really interesting because remember, not everyone had a computer at home, and computers were these monstrous machines. They were like in army bases, and certain law enforcement facilities had them, and they looked like they belonged more on a manufacturing floor than in someone's home. So this book goes into the details of how this person went about tracking down a hacker. It's really an interesting read, and it's not technical at all. It actually reads more like a fiction book, but it's real, and it's really something that I highly recommend if you're interested in this field or just looking at it. It's a good read. In 1992, not very long ago, was the first time that the word actually computer forensics was coined. At that time, forensics was more of what we consider, CSI, that wet forensics, that detective work. Then it branched off, and then we finally had like, what is computer forensics? In 2002, not so long ago, was the first time that the best practices for computer forensics was developed by a scientific working group. And the important part is that we're still learning today. That's one thing about being a forensic examiner, is that you're always curious, you're always learning. There's never a dull moment. Every day you learn something new, especially as technology evolves. I do mobile forensics now, and like I said, that is just it's a vast field. And the fact that our technology, our hardware specifically, like all these mobile devices are changing, how they track this data, how they keep this data, you have to be on your toes. You have to be always learning and always curious. So that's one reason why I gravitate to this field, because I really, really enjoy that. So, let's see the next slide.
As I mentioned before, DFIR, we refer to it kind of as the overarching, name for the field, but there's really a lot of specializations within it. There's host-based forensics, which is, what Eric mentioned at the beginning, and you're talking about computer forensics, probably forensics on the data that's on the hard drive or the SSD drive, whatever the onboard storage is. And so, because of that, host-based forensics, it tends to focus on the most prevalent operating systems that are seen in industry. So Windows is the majority of different instruction that you'll find out there, but there's also Linux and Mac forensics, which require their own specialized knowledge set in order to be successful there. Then there's network forensics, where you'll be looking at, packet captures to see what was the traffic, was there malware going across, what type of, what was somebody doing you can glean from the network traffic coming to or from a host. There's memory forensics where you might take a memory image, which is kind of taking a picture at moment in time of what a system was doing, what it was processing. And that's extremely valuable, especially for something like a host intrusion investigation, because you can see what the malware was doing, what were command and control communications, all that good stuff you can get from memory very easily compared to trying to get that via hard drive based forensics. Mobile device forensics that Abby was discussing, that's a big field, especially with like corporate investigations and law enforcement. So that's huge, and that's its own world. Something which I hope to learn a little bit more at some point. But I don't even have skill set there. Abby's the guru there on this call about that. IoT forensics. So by now a lot of people have smart speakers in their home. They might have a Nest thermostat, an Ecobee thermostat, the Alexa, all that type of stuff would fall into IoT. And that can give you pretty good information, especially for maybe like a criminal investigation, because it can tell you the presence of somebody in the home. It might say, okay, if the thermostat was changing, it's because it detected activity in this room. Like there's a lot of useful information that can be gleaned from that. Industrial control systems. So that would be, if you have machinery in a factory floor that's controlled by network traffic or so, forensics of that can tell you if that's especially useful. We have now these state-sponsored attackers that attack like power generation plants, right? That happened a few years ago. I think like in Ukraine, they got hit by unfortunately, again, Ukraine has been getting hammered in the last few years, but there was some of their power plants were taken down, I think, by malware, but that was preceded by some industrial control systems attacks. The second to last bullet there, IR, that's kind of where I live, right? So it's a specialization within DFIR because you might be doing analysis, but it might not be, necessarily network forensics, memory forensics. It might be, looking at SIM logs. It might be looking at EDR to get a lot of the same data that you would get from host or memory forensics. And then e-discovery, which is e-discovery is kind of mixing in now a lot of same, right? You do this a little bit more frequently than I do, Abby, but I used to do this a few jobs ago pretty frequently. So you take this bullet. It's been a while since I've done a lot of that.
Yeah. That's why there's the asterisk.
Yeah.
A lot of folks, when they say DFIR, don't really think of e-discovery, but the same skill sets apply. And e-discovery is essentially it sits under legal. It's a part of process where you're collecting and preserving data that's going to be presented in court. So you need the same skills of identification, preservation, collecting in a manner that is going to meet the court standards. And it's just electronic discovery. So in the legal system, there's something called discovery, which is where you have to plaintiffs and defendants share data and through discovery. The same thing, it's electronic discovery. But it's not always seen as a default specialization under digital forensics or incident response, but the skill sets are the same. And oftentimes, if you work as an in-house digital forensic examiner, you will be doing a lot of e-discovery work. Like if you look at these job descriptions, they both overlap. And a lot of folks wear those two hats. So that's why for me, I call it out because a lot of us work in that field, and it's important to call that out. Whether or not folks who start off in e-discovery go on to digital forensics, that's another story, but the same skill set applies. So it's important to call that there. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, the short version is that when I was at smaller companies as a what was it, cyber threat investigator, I think was one title I had at a smaller company a while back. I basically did all of these things. Now I'm more specialized and I do kind of the second to last bullet, maybe the first two bullets. Abby does some of these more than others. So it kind of depends on your company, how many people they have, if there's enough people to specialize into each of these bullets.
Cool. Yeah, sorry. I had one extra thought on that. Regarding your titles, sometimes the titles don't overlap with the actual job description. So I've oftentimes been called like cybersecurity engineer, information security analyst, IT security engineer. But at the same time, all I was doing was digital forensics and internal investigation, so host-based forensics, doing all that. So just keep that in mind also with that.
Yeah, very good point.
And then,
don't get too hung up on the title.
Yeah. But also before we get into like those skill sets, and we mentioned the digital forensics process and those frameworks that are out there, we have to talk about, like, before we even think about how we apply those, the main key points, as I mentioned before, like identification, preservation, collection, examination, analysis, and presentation. So when we talk about identification, it's really of what are we trying to achieve? What are we collecting? Where is this data located? What type of data are we looking at? Different cases will have different types of data sets or data sources that we need to look at, and different data types. And by data sources is where's that data sitting, right? So if we're talking about mobile forensics, we're going to think about, well, okay, so it's sitting on the device, but where actually is it on that device? And then if we're talking about data types, like I can give you a cell phone, and if you're really good at SQL, you're going to figure it out, because the data type are just SQL databases. So it's like the same thing with Apple. Apple, a lot of their devices just plist. So if you understand how to work with that type of data, then it doesn't really matter what the data source is. Sometimes, though, there are really specialized data types, especially if you're working with like engineers or any type of like manufacturing files. Then that does take a little bit of extra work and understanding how to process that data, preserve that data, and things like that, and then analyze that data. The second part of the process of the digital forensics process is just preservation. You actually have to go and preserve that data. You have to collect it. You have to secure it from that data source, because now it's going to be evidence, right? So, like I said, a lot of this is rooted in those law enforcement background and process. So you have to protect that data from deletion. So you get it from where that data source is, you protect it, and you isolate it from data and deletion or destruction, and then you start collecting it, which is like you download that data, you save that data somewhere, you process that data, you index that data, and then you can start your examination and analysis, which is you start reviewing that data. And then your presentation. Your presentation can be, depending if you're working like in-house, or if you're working with outside law enforcement, or if you're working with legal teams, you have to present that data, and you present your analysis, your findings, and that's pretty much the very high level overview of the digital forensics process. Ramon, did you have anything else to add here?
No, not so much. Just that on the next slide, we're going to be talking about the incident response process here, and the two, we're presenting them as like separate slides, but the two are not mutually exclusive. You'll be doing, if it's an incident response case that involves like host forensics, then really both processes are happening just at different stages. So to that point, so the incident response process, what I'm showing you here comes from a NIST publication, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, right? I think SP 800, I believe it is. And that's this is the most frequently, I think, seen the workflow or the life cycle for incident response, which is essentially a few phases there, which is preparation. Preparation is essentially all the work you do to prepare your organization in order to be able to address an incident, respond to an incident once one comes in. So that would involve things like making sure the cybersecurity team is trained up, making sure there's a call tree so that the people that are going to see, detections and alerts know who to call when an alert is declared. Making sure that we have licenses for our forensics tools, right? You don't want to start working an incident and you realize that your Axiom license expired, a week ago. That's happened before, with their team. Making sure that you do the occasional incident response tabletop exercise, making sure logging is in place, that you're retaining logs for the appropriate amount of time, all that good stuff. Detection analysis is is similar to the fourth bullet here that Abby mentioned, examination analysis. So that's where, you're detecting, so you're receiving the alert, you're parsing what an alert is that's alerting you to an incident, and then you're doing the analysis, figuring out, okay, this system, we got an alert that it might be compromised with malware. What system was it talking to? What users have been logging into that system? Those are some examples. For number 3 is shown there, containment would be trying to limit the extent of the damage related to this incident. So that could be as simple as turning off a system. That's not usually going to be our first option because we don't want to lose evidence that's on it, but more frequently you're going to want to do something like isolating the system, cutting off its network connectivity so it can no longer communicate with any other systems. You can't have any additional data exfiltration. You can't have any other users logged into it, etc. Maybe cutting off connectivity for a web application to the internet, etc. Eradication then is removing all traces of the compromise from the environment. So that could be deleting compromised user accounts. It could be turning off or like deleting affected data. If you have a ransomware that encrypts the entire environment, it might just be deleting all that data that's useless anyway, along with the executable that's causing the encryption. Recovery is probably one of the more obviously named ones here, and that's just trying to restore the affected environment back to its pre-compromised state, the pre-incident state. So the simplest example of recovery action would be restoring to a known good backup before the incident even occurred. In some cases, eradication and recovery can be the same. Like, if you just immediately restore to a backup, that takes care of both eradication and recovery if that's the only system that's affected, right? And then post-incident activity. This one's important because it's oftentimes neglected. This is taking all the lessons learned from all the previous steps and then, taking that knowledge and, going back to preparation, using that to feed the preparation for the organization so that they're better equipped to handle future incidents. So that could be if we realize, okay, the attacker was able to move from system A to system B because the same user was able to log into both, but they didn't need to. The user only needed to be able to log into system A. Then the post-incident activity related to that finding is doing better access control so that users can only access the systems, the assets that they need to, right? And writing reports. So post-incident activity is going to be very similar to the presentation aspect of the digital forensics process because you're taking the data, everything you learned from the incident and using that to present findings to that in a way that is going to help the organization be better prepared to address future incidents. And if you see here, there's curved arrows because the incident response life cycle is not meant to be you finish step 1 and the next day you go to step 2 and you never go back to step 1, for example. During containment, eradication, recovery, you might find that you need to go back to analysis because you find additional aspects of the incident. So this is meant to be a cycle, not just a one and done, workflow.
So now that we've kind of talked over some history and some foundational background on what digital forensics and incident response are, we can start talking about like the application, the actual application. What does that look like? So examiners use a lot of knowledge and experience to decide which actions and steps to take based on the type of case, the type of investigation they're doing. The big one is identifying the scope and appropriate avenues to pursue. And one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of the work, at least that I do, I cannot do it without approvals from legal or employee relations or management. Like management, I have high visibility. All my work has high visibility. I can't do anything without their blessing in a way. So that's why it's important to have really good communication with management and leadership and be able to talk about, well, let's identify the scope. What are we actually looking for here? What are we actually trying to achieve? So I guess best example would be like, okay, someone took data from our network. Okay, so what are we looking at? Our first step is like, okay, let's look at the logs. What were they accessing? What were they trying to do? Even before I even touch any of their devices, I just need to look at the logs, right? Based on that, then I can work with my legal team and say, hey, this is what we're seeing here. What can we do? What should we do? And that's like our the next bullet point of work backwards. We kind of have to start with what do we know? What's the allegation? What's the incident? What other clues are there? Was this person supposed to be accessing this data? Well, maybe they got a promotion and we weren't made aware. So yeah, maybe they should have been accessing this data. Or maybe, hey, no, this is really not something they're approved to access, right? And then, we should be able to, at any given time, assess the direction. So it's really assess the direction of the investigation. So it's always important to have that open communication with your teammates and with like leadership. Like, I don't work in a bubble. I don't work alone. I'm always in communication with everyone who's touching this case. Because we also, like I said, have to avoid jumping to conclusions, or like I mentioned, like the slide says, avoid jumping to conclusions for this case. There's a lot of data that we have to go through and analyze in order to tell a story. So much like I used to do when I was an archaeologist, I have to let the facts speak for themselves. So in archaeology, when you're digging down through the dirt, you can't go back, like I like to say, you can't go back and ask King Tut if he ate pizza for dinner, right? You have to let these facts speak for themselves, and then you have to tell the story, right? And so you're always in talks, you're always communication, you're always looking at data. And one thing that's really important to understand when we're doing these investigations is that we need to know when to stop. When we see something like, we can't just jump into this rabbit hole. If there's like something we really like, oh my gosh, this sounds really cool, I really want to do it, and this is it, this is what's going to break the case. We really have to stop, understand what's going on, reassess, and go back to the scope, right? That's why it's really important to understand those parameters and what we're trying to do. That's why identification is the first step in the digital forensics process, right? You have to understand what you're doing. You have to understand what you're really evaluating. What is the goal of the case, right?
And Abby, I want to jump in here because I have a case study that happened to me for real, and it highlights this avoid jumping to conclusions. I had a case where I got a computer from a major company, and they said this person has been making terroristic threats. So I started looking at his computer, and I found a bunch of bloody pictures, surgeries, and things like that. Then I saw he was buying shield of armor. And then I saw that he was doing a lot of stuff with motorcycles. And at that point, I could have stopped and said, yes, this guy is a threat. Well, I found out the bloody pictures was because he was a motorcycle rider who had been in an accident. He was doing research on a hip replacement and had the pictures that he saw on the website. The suit of armor was because he was a reenactor, and it wasn't a suit of armor. It was like a Star Wars stormtrooper. So if I had jumped to conclusions, I would have said, this guy's a bloody murderer. Well, it turns out the reason he was making terroristic threats is because I found emails of him and his girlfriend fighting. So the whole thing that happened at the company was him and his girlfriend fighting, and they were yelling at each other. So the investigation did not yield that he could have been, a terroristic threat to the company, even though my artifacts had some things that were weird. So avoiding jumping to conclusion too early is a fact. Okay, I'll shut up now.
No, that's a good point. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So that's a really good story about how it's really important to just let the facts speak for themselves and avoid jumping to conclusions, especially early on in your investigation. Ramon?
Yeah, no, what I was just going to add is like, to reinforce what Abby says, working backwards is really important. Like, even my team, we're not necessarily specifically, digital forensics, but incident response, but like our reports, when we do our incident response analysis reports, are laid out in a manner consistent with what everything Abby said. Like, we start with the background, basically why the incident response case was opened. Then we talk about our objectives, which is what Abby said, working backward. Then we say, all right, what are the actions that we need to take in order to achieve those objectives? And after that, what we don't put on, that's when we start talking to legal. It's like, okay, in order to figure out why this system was talking to this country, shouldn't be, I need to take an image. We need to make sure that we're not taking any data out of a certain country it's not supposed to. And then, we work backwards from the original allegation or the alert, whatever it is, to identify the objectives, figure out what actions we need to do in order to achieve those objectives, and then we start doing the work of digging through the ones and zeros to figure out what the answers are, to answer those original objectives. And we, to several slides ago in the beginning, Abby wrote that one where it's like it's a science of preserving, collecting, and analyzing digital data. And we try to approach our investigations, our incident response analysis in a manner that is consistent with a scientific method, a clearly delineated method to try and avoid biases, premature conclusions, et cetera. And I'm sure, my team, and I'm sure Abby's team as well, we even do a peer review process, right? We have our peers or managers review our cases, review our conclusions, review our reports before we present it, before we enter it into the case record, just to make sure that we're not making a mistake, jumping to a conclusion that's not consistent with the evidence, et cetera. So here, the whole point of this slide is just that, consistent with what Abby was saying before, is that we follow a consistent process. We should follow a consistent process. So if you have two examiners that are looking at the same evidence, we should be able to perform independent analysis and arrive at the same conclusions. Our analysis results, that should be, repeatable. So two analysts, two investigators should be able to get to the same results. The same analyst should get to the same results using different tools. Different analysts should get to the same results using different tools. If ever that doesn't happen, then that means everybody needs to stop, go back and double check what they're doing, because we need to make sure that we are as close to truth as possible. So, if Abby works a case, creates a report that describes artifacts and the conclusions she drew from those artifacts, if I do peer review or I'm doing analysis for opposing counsel, if it's a case that's going to, to a court case, I should get to the same conclusions as Abby. Now, that doesn't always happen in a real case, but it might be just because maybe I look at different artifacts, but the data that's there, if we're looking at the same data, we should get to the same exact conclusions. That's the ideal, and that's what we always want to be striving towards. Anything else you want to add there, Abby?
We're good. Cool. So we haven't really talked about the skill sets yet, but an examiner's skill set can be broken down into two pieces. You have your soft skills and your technical skills. Your soft skills encompass things related to people, communication, character, personality. These can be things like communication skills, listening skills, time management, which is a big one in digital forensics, and empathy. For examiners, soft skills include being highly curious, inquisitive. As we mentioned earlier on, this field is vast and always changing. So being inquisitive, being curious, asking questions, being proactive in finding answers to those questions, and able to develop and test hypotheses, those are highly valuable. Being collaborative. So as Ramon mentioned, peer review, that is big. So, and also not everyone has all the answers. So being able to be open, ask for help, be open in giving help is a big one. And I kind of want to talk about, so I recently got my CFCE, I sat for that, and that one is a certification given by IASIS, and it's almost 6 months to go through the certification, and the first 4 months consist of a peer review. So part of that is being able to, you get an image every month, and you have to dive deep into this image, but you also have to be able to speak to that with the coach, with the mentor, and be able to work through it and achieve the same results. So that is a big, I love that certification because it is huge for developing that collaboration skills, that communication skills, and the ability to ask questions. So definitely something to look into. Patience is another virtue or skill that I would highlight, because sometimes the answers aren't always there. It does take time sometimes, especially when you're looking at tons of logs, tons of data, tons of artifacts, and the artifacts sometimes aren't always where you expect them to be. Sometimes depending on if the software has been updated or they release a new artifact, right? It's just not always easy. So having a lot of patience is a big one. And then being a critical thinker. Sometimes you do have to think outside the box. Sometimes it's not always obvious. And this is where I think being able to understand people and how people behave is a big one, because sometimes people will not follow, this baseline that you expect, right? So you have to be able to think outside of the box, think about the bigger picture, and try to put these pieces together when you're doing your investigative work. So, Ramon, anything else to add here?
Critical thinking. I mean, I'm glad that that's on this slide because I feel like that's something that would be to everyone's benefit to think about more. And that's really related to a lot of what we were discussing on the previous two slides about. That's where critical thinking is a skill because it helps you avoid, biases to the extent possible. It helps you, check yourself for like logical fallacies and stuff like that in your thinking and your reporting. And that's really important because it can help you, check yourself for errors, maybe figure out ways to do analysis that you might not have thought of otherwise. So that's a really important one. And that is very much a skill that is developed with time. It's not something that's easily, that you can easily develop just from reading a textbook. So that's kind of something you only learn from giving it like, specific thought about, thinking about your thinking, which is what critical thinking essentially means, making sure that you're scrutinizing, your conclusions and how you arrive at those conclusions. So that one's really important, right? And that probably is the biggest differentiator between kind of junior people and people that are seasoned and can really kind of handle themselves in lots of situations. Aside from communication, that was also really important because when you, yeah. So, communication there, that one's important because when we're doing digital forensics incident response, we're talking about really, really technical data, and we have to be able to communicate that to people that have enough knowledge to be able to challenge us, and also communicate that to people that have no knowledge or experience in our field. And you have to be able to do both fluidly and comfortably in order to not be like kind of run over in some cases, right? So that one's real important. Like we mentioned a few slides ago, that being process oriented, following a good process is extremely important because that can help you not waste time. Aside from being able to produce valid results that can be defended, it's also going to help you, reduce the amount of time that's wasted. And then documentation, that last bullet, really important because that's going to help you reduce the amount of time it takes you to produce your reports. It's going to help you defend your conclusions really well. It's going to help your peer reviewers, look over your work without having to, ask you about every single thing you did. So again, I'm a manager, so I really get on people's cases about their notes. If their notes are lacking in details or they're not there, they go a day or two without putting in notes. I get on people's cases pretty frequently about that. Like I'm a stickler for making sure that people put in their notes, that the notes are good enough that another analyst could just pick up the case right where they left off. If somebody calls in sick one day, I don't want us to have to go back and do a bunch of work just because notes weren't entered in properly. 2 days, 2 days without notes for a case is an issue for me sometimes. So yeah, that's a lot. There's a lot that goes into it as far as soft skills, but these are some of the ones that we feel are particularly important. So technical skills. Do you want to start off with this, Abby? Especially since you did not start in the IT field, that could be interesting, right?
Yeah, so I actually did not start off in the IT field. I had no technical background at all. Actually, I hold a BA in Near Eastern archaeology and an MA in Near Eastern art in managing archaeological sites. So I was really into being, an archaeologist. I did all that. We really didn't really do a lot of IT stuff. I mean, I used an Access database and that's about it. So, but it is important that to have at least a basic understanding of, basic understanding of troubleshooting, some network knowledge, and for me, the way I started off was I love to read. So I always, I just went straight to my books. It's funny, I share this story because to show how far I've come and what I like, my passion for reading was when I first started off over a decade ago here. I had only read about Linux in books and only just understood about, okay, so it was developed by Linus. And I went to one of my examiners first because I started off as an evidence technician in a digital forensics lab. And I'm like, oh yeah, I've seen this before. This is that, uh, um, what was it? What did I say? Linux guy. This is that Linux stuff. And he's like, what are you talking about? And it's like, yeah, Linus, he developed this, Linus Torvalds, he developed all this, and my examiner just looks at me and he's like, you mean Linux? And I'm like, yeah, right, because I'd only read about it and looked at that, but so there are many ways. The point is, there are many ways to gain technical skills. There's not just, you have to go to school for this. You have to get a certification for this. You can always, there's a bunch of resources that we're going to share later. But the basic things are like understanding just how to troubleshoot, right? Understanding how to get your way out of something. And the reason why that's important to be able to like troubleshoot is because you're always thinking, you're always asking questions, and you're always going to Google. So, I mean, that's okay as long as you're being proactive about that. So we mentioned that earlier, being proactive about finding questions, being able to test your hypotheses, right? So if you do have a question, you should be able to be like, oh, well, let me go and try it out for myself. Let me figure it out. Other things that are important, other technical skills that are important for this, Python, PowerShell, SQL, those are big. I use PowerShell a lot. I use SQL a lot. So those are really important kind of skill sets to have under your belt. Data visualization, data analysis, and databases. You're dealing with a lot of data here, and you're presenting data in all sorts of ways. So being able to understand Excel, the number one security tool in digital forensics, Tableau. Yeah. I'm telling you, Excel. Excel is the number one tool that it's your go-to. Other skills about evidence handling, understanding chain of custody, that's a big one. Operating systems, we listed Windows and Linux here. Those are the big ones. And then the ability to interpret artifacts from multiple operating systems and apply that knowledge to investigations. So artifacts galore in Windows. Windows is what I'm most comfortable in. So being able to understand which are your go-to artifacts in Windows, especially depending on what kind of investigation you're doing. So in my case, usually it's about user behavior. So my first artifacts I go to will be, the user's profile, ntuser.dat, things like that. So the registry, being able to understand and talk about those are big. So.
To Abby's point about the operating system, the artifacts. Sometimes when I speak to interns, what I tell people is what's important for DFIR, especially it's for DF or the IR, right? Both pieces. What's really important is it's kind of like when you're in like high school and you're doing your chemistry classes, right? You have to study the periodic table, what the properties of the elements are. So that's the kind of the book learning, so to speak. But then you also have to know how to conduct an experiment, so that you don't, blow up the experiment in your face, how you mix the mixtures correctly. So there's both parts. You have to know kind of the detail about how the Windows operating system, the artifacts, application artifacts, and then know how to do the investigation to get to your conclusion efficiently and correctly. So I mean, to Abby's point, right, she does a lot of user investigations that focus on user behavior. So you're actually looking at into user.dat. You might be looking at, Windows events. There's going to be some stuff that's really interesting there. I do a lot of investigations that revolve around malware, host intrusions. So I focus on different artifacts a lot of times. I'll be looking at maybe the system and software registry hives, the Windows events. I'll be looking at, maybe volume shadow copies, MFT, NTFS journal if I'm looking for stuff that happened on the file system. An example, one where I was looking more at user behavior, a little bit more of what Abby does recently is I worked a case where we were looking to see if a user, exfilled some data off a system. So that's not always the easiest thing to prove, but the data was huge. So what I did look at is I know there's a specific artifact, the Windows System Resource Usage Manager, the SRUM, and just looking at the data going in versus data out. And in this case, the data out was not big enough to account for the file in question. So, I mean, that's an easy way. It's like, no, this file was really, really large. They didn't send out that much data over the period in time in question. So they could not have sent the data out over the network anyway, right? So, I mean, I bring that up because it's important. If you have good knowledge of the artifacts, you can save yourself a lot of time on an investigation because you can target your analysis to what gives you, quote unquote, quick wins. What was going to help you drive the conclusions quickly and efficiently. All right. Building your toolkit as a DFIR analyst, a DFIR investigator, that's important because you need to know how to use your tools. You need to have multiple tools to address common tasks, and you also want to have multiple tools to do the same thing because sometimes a tool just doesn't work on a certain data set, or maybe the license happened to expire, or maybe you can't use a certain tool for a certain investigation for some reason. So it's important that you're able to address the situation, that you're prepared in order to address the situation. So what we have here is multiple categories of tools that are common that you're usually going to run into. When you're a DFIR analyst, DFIR investigator, you're usually going to have to use tools like these. So the first bullet, imaging, triage imaging. So that's the act of capturing the data that you're going to do the analysis on. So it corresponds to the preservation phase of the digital forensic process that Abby mentioned several slides ago. So common tools there would be FDK Imager, which is very useful for just capturing a disk image from a computer. CAPE, which is a tool that you can use for a triage collection on Windows. So a triage collection would be collecting specific artifacts that you want. I don't need because something that's important is when you're doing like maybe disk-based analysis, for lots of investigations, a hard drive might be 500 gig hard drive, but I probably only need maybe a few gigs worth of that data in order to do an investigation pretty thoroughly. And I might need the whole thing if I want to recover data, carve files, things like that, but a lot of times you really only need a small fraction of data that's resident on that drive in order to do a good investigation. So triage collections can be a way to do things faster. The third one that's on the line, DD, that's disk duplicator. There's different stories about what DD means, but that's a built-in utility on Linux and Unix-like operating systems that you can just do a straight copy of a volume or file or folder. Write blockers that's important because when you're imaging a drive, imaging a hard drive, for example, or some other data storage device, you want to be careful that in the process of creating that image, you don't inadvertently modify the original data. So a write blocker it can be a software write blocker, but most of the time people say write blocker, they're referring to a hardware write blocker. So that's essentially a device that you plug the hard drive or the data volume into, and then that plugs into the forensic analyst system. And what it does is that it prevents any data from being written back to the original evidence storage device. And then the last one, Magnet Acquire, that's another acquisition like tool, kind of like FTK Imager, but and pretty much aside from write blockers, write blockers for the most part, since they're hardware devices, all the other stuff on that list is free. Although I'm not 100% certain that Magnet Acquire. Abby, do you know, is Acquire free?
That one is.
Okay.
It's free. I think you have to give up your email address for it.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
But it is free.
Okay.
And,
you want to take the next ones?
Sure. For mounting, FTK imager, Arsenal image mounter, EWF mount. So those are ways just to view a device natively, so without going through like a full forensic suite. So yeah, don't use those as much. I don't use those as much, but it's important to know those in case you do have to like quickly look at something or recover something. It's just a really useful things to have. The analysis part, you can do autopsy, which is free. That's a wonderful tool to use. It feels like a full forensic suite. Then you have the SIF workstation, bunch of tools there too. NCase is an enterprise tool, not free, but if you do have access to that in your environment, highly suggest you try to play around with it. It is a pretty much go-to full forensic suite tool. So worth knowing. Same with Axiom. And then Eric Zimmerman puts out a whole bunch of tools, free tools that you can always, like I just used the XF tool to analyze a photo the other day, and it was just really cool. Just download it and you're ready to rock. So definitely take a look at those tools. Yeah, and then reporting and data presentation. Gotta have all that Microsoft Office skills. Open Office is another one worth knowing. And then the last bullet point, reference guides for operating system and file system artifacts. SANS puts out a lot of these like quick guides worth downloading. And one thing I want to say about building a toolkit, it's really important to have something download these files or tools you're comfortable with in a kind of like location that's easily accessible to you. I have a bunch of these downloaded just on various hard drives so that if I need to go somewhere, I just have those on the fly. I started off in consulting, so that's how we were trained to do it. Just have all of these downloaded, have these ready to rock, and be comfortable with them and update them. It's really important to update them with the latest software. So I didn't list anything here for mobile forensics, but Cellbrite, Belkasoft, and Oxygen are really good tools. And those are really at an enterprise level, so they don't offer anything free. However, if you are interested in mobile forensics, Belkasoft and Cellbrite do offer their tools free during their CTF. So they do put out a CTF. Belkasoft, I think, puts out a CTF every quarter. So if you sign up, you join, they will give you a free license for about a 30-day license for their tool. So that's a great way to be exposed to some of these enterprise level suites that you may not be that may not be accessible to you if you don't work in that type of environment. So
Abby was mentioning reference guides, so I was actually looking. SANS puts out a lot of posters, Windows Forensics Analysis posters, and I was looking here. Let's see if I can get that to full screen. Yeah,
the posters are great. I have those, like I said, download those, especially the Windows artifacts ones.
Yeah, the infamous red poster.
Artifacts for you to, yeah, the infamous red poster. Way too many artifacts for you to like keep.
Yeah, just look how. I wasn't going to go through others, but just looking how big this poster is. I mean, it's huge. I mean, there's lots and lots to go on here, but I mean, it is good to refer to every once in a while if you need to. Like, oh, what? I need evidence of data exfiltration. I need evidence of this or that, and that's a good place to go to. Oddly enough, they even have some posters now in Spanish. It's like this one, they call it, the names are funny in Spanish. It's like amenazas cibernético or something like that. That's what you've heard. So it sounds actually much more dramatic in Spanish, I feel like. All right. So what we have here is we included this because, I think Gabby and I have both discussed that we get questions a lot of times from people about, I don't even know where in cybersecurity I want to go. So, I mean, this is a good tool. We feel like the NICCS, because when you click on this, what it does is, you have all these, bullets and bubbles you can click on where, okay, let's say cyber defense forensics analyst. That sounds cool. And then you can click on it. And then what you have here is it tells you a lot of neat information, like what are the tasks that are typically involved with the job. what are some KSA, so key knowledge, skills, and abilities. And I like to bring this up with people because when you're trying to figure out where you might want to take your career, it's important to know, all right, first of all, where do I think my interests lie? And once I know where my interests lie, what do I have to do to steer my career in that direction? Do I need to do training? Do I need to go back to school? Do I need to network with people with these skills? And, this can be a good way for you to start getting that knowledge on figuring out, how you get yourself going in the direction that you think you want to go. And this can change, obviously, but it's better than just necessarily looking at a list of job titles, because like Abby said, earlier, job title alone should not be the only thing that you focus on as you are thinking about your career in cybersecurity or any other field for that matter. But so keep this in mind. If you want more information about, roles that are related to DFIR or any other roles within cybersecurity, this can be a pretty useful tool for you to help figure out what you might need to know in order to get yourself going in that direction with a good chance of success. All right, let's go back to the. All right, and finally here, we will make this slide deck available to everyone afterwards today, but I'll check. It might actually be already publicly available, but there's a lot of resources that are available to you to learn more about DFIR. If we have to call out some specifically here that are good, as DFIR is a really good one, right, Abby?
DFIR is amazing, yeah.
DFIR is a really good one. She has free and affordable training, lots of information related to DFIR. So that's a really good site that I highly recommend. And what we were mentioning here, these are the links for some of the tools that were discussed earlier: FTK Imager, Magnet Acquire, CAPE, a list of forensic tools. Andrea Fortuna puts out a lot of good information. And then we have we haven't updated this slide, Abby. We need to put Raices on here. There's lots of good information here, hopefully. Sorry, you going to say something?
Stark Forensics, that blog over there, he puts out one amazing, it looks like it's on acid, board with just everything you can think of. The Start Me, yes, this one. And I actually had to go reference it the other day because it's just great. Everything you can think of is located in this page. I love it. It's, like I said, it's a go-to. So
he's got the links to the individual posts.
So anything you can think of or need help on, this is a great resource. So
yeah, this page is almost overwhelming, but it's a good thing to keep in your back pocket once you start learning a little bit more.
Yeah.
All right.
Cool.
All right.
Question.
So.
Yeah, we did have one question in the chat that I wanted to answer. So the question was, since I didn't, or what was it? Let me read it. Let me find it. Question was, as someone who did not have a traditional background in information cybersecurity, why did you make that jump? So for me, in my case, I actually found myself unemployed. So I graduated around the time of the Great Recession. And at the time, because of the nature of what I wanted to do, archaeology and working in museums that are just contract jobs, there wasn't a lot of stuff out there for me. So one of my contracts fell through and I found myself really needing a job. I actually found a posting on Craigslist of all places, and they're like, we need someone with a library background. I'm like, okay, let's try this. So I never heard of what evidence technician is, never heard of digital forensics, but they needed someone with a library background because that's how chain of custody works. It's just checking in and out, like back in the days in the library. So I applied for this job. They asked a whole bunch of questions. I tried my best at answering them, and they're like, hey, cool, you're hired. And never looked back. From that point, I was the grunt of the lab. So they're like, here's a box of cables, here's a box of computers, go figure it out, go put them together. And I did. Then they're like, hey, this is NCASE, figure it out. So I did, and that's how I got started. Went from there, and then just continued on my way. I mean, every time there's like, here's a tool set, go figure it out. And the one thing that I always advocate is don't just learn a tool, learn what the tools doing. Because if you only learn a tool, then that's all you're going to know. But if you know what the tool is actually doing, then any tool they put in front of you, you're going to be able to figure it out. Whether I give you Axiom, Ncase, Xways, if you understand how that tool is carving that data or parsing that data out, you're going to be able to figure it out. So don't just learn a tool, understand what that tool is actually doing. So, and that's how I was taught, and that's how I continued on my career. So that was my background into this. So, Ramon, is there anything you wanted to add to that question?
No, I was just going to emphasize the point you made about learning the artifact. Learn, I guess, like that. But that's important. A lot of the commercial forensic suites, everything's in a GUI. It kind of shows you, tells you everything, but every once in a while those tools will have errors, or you need to be able to explain something in a different way. And if you really only know, click this button in Ncase, click this button in Axiom, you're going to have a harder time, when you're being scrutinized more, or if there's a potential error. So I gave a workshop to some interns earlier this summer on very, very basic level DFIR skills. And I didn't give them any GUI tools they didn't use Axiom or Ncase. They used like easy tools, a lot of command line tools, so that they had to know, okay, dig out the artifact, run this command line. So to give them a better understanding of the artifact rather than just, the tool tells you the answers. It's really important to be a complete, and thorough DFIR professional. You do have to understand the artifacts.
Yeah, you can't just push a button. That's not how it works in this field. Just pushing a button is not going to get you anywhere. Like we hope we demonstrated during this, you actually have to understand and defend your work. So pushing a button, like I said, in this certification that I just went through, that actually doesn't give you full credit at all. That doesn't give you any credit. That's considered a fail. You answer, I pushed a button, or the tool told me. You actually have to explain what you did, So, that's important.
This is more for Abby. I sometimes rag on Axiom. I call it like the play school of forensics because it's so GUI focused. So
it is.
Yeah.
It's
a great tool.
But... Yeah. It's a great tool if you're just like quick and dirty. But if you don't really understand, like I love it when it does the internet browsing history, because it's like, here's all the internet browsing history, and it's like, okay, but where did you pull that from? What dates are the dates matching? Right? You actually for me, I prefer Ncase. That is a little bit, it can be
harsher.
Too much. Yeah, it is harsher because you actually have to understand where to go and pinpoint it. So you cannot just say, here's the registry artifact, right? Here's a security hive. No, you actually have to understand, no, I have to go to system 32, config, go get it out, pull it out. So that keeps me on my toes. Xways is even just crazier because it's pretty much you're just staring at hex all day.
Xways shouldn't. Yeah, you shouldn't let a newbie use Xways on their own.
Your own, unless you understand hex, you're gonna be but yeah. So we do have another question.
Yeah.
Would you recommend DFIR as an entry-level job? Is there a specific role type one should be looking for? I know you have thoughts, Ramon.
I do have thoughts. As an entry-level job, if someone doesn't have any knowledge or experience in IT or cybersecurity, it can be tough. Abby did it, so it's not that you can't do it, but it's not the easiest job, I feel like, as an entry level in cybersecurity. And
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. There's probably easier ways to get into cybersecurity than an entry level job in DFIR. Abby's and my focus in DFIR are a little bit different, right? I'm more on the corporate cybersecurity incident response. She's like corporate investigations. For me, I have hired people that have not worked in cybersecurity before, but usually those people either they had some schooling or something, because there's a significant amount of responsibility on my team when a cyber incident is affecting my company. Like, it's on us to protect the company and keep the damage from getting worse. So the training, the amount of training we do for somebody that doesn't have a background is significant, like months before they're really kind of on their own. And obviously, the more experience someone has, the easier it is just know cybersecurity concepts, right? That will help. I feel like a more common path to get into DFIR, at least on the cyber incident response side, is maybe like SOC, security analysts, security engineering. Those help you recognize things that are common in cybersecurity first. So it's not that it can't happen, but it's not the easiest route to get into cybersecurity. It's not. Yeah, there's easier ways to get into the field, I feel like.
Yeah, for us, it is, I wouldn't say entry level. More, you do require some type of background. For me, I actually started as an evidence technician, so I didn't even touch any of the cases. And the evidence technician really is kind of the brunt of the lab. They are the, clean the lab, fix the lab, here a bunch of hard drives fix, mostly on the hardware side. Software side, I was taught very little on image a drive, right? Here you can image a drive, don't break anything. But the reason I was able to break in is the mindset, archaeology, and the digital forensics investigation process, very similar. So the learning curve wasn't as high for me because the technical skills can be taught. The soft skills, the communication, the understanding that investigation process, that can't be taught. Okay? You have to ask those right questions. You have to understand those fundamentals. In terms of like if someone were interested in breaking into this, SOC is a great one, SOC, because at least on in my experience, they do, especially if you're on the DLP team, DLP will do like the level 1 or 2 incidents, and then bring that off over to us to do the, the higher level investigations. And then also e-discovery, I mentioned that again because like I said, the skills overlap, and sometimes the foot into e-discovery is much easier than it is into a digital forensics career. So
But that doesn't mean it's impossible. Like you said, there are jobs that are entry level. A STEM background always helps to have that mentality, the critical thinking, like we both mentioned earlier, and it helps, if you're working on your resume, I tell people if you don't have the professional, experience, if you have a home lab, if you do CTFs, list that. Say you have a section for personal learning and list, I did this CTF. The goal of this CTF was to find this artifact. I did so by doing that. Obviously you can't put a whole paragraph on the resume, but I value that when I'm looking at resumes because it shows a drive to learn that's beyond just what you do in school. Like you have to go to school, or most people feel like they have to go to school or college. You have to do, whatever experience you get in previous jobs. Nobody forces you to do learning on your own. Like, just take a few hours on Saturdays and do a CTF. No one forces you to do that. So if you list that stuff on your resume and your LinkedIn, and you put something on there about what you learned, that can be pretty valuable to list on there. It shows a drive that not everyone has. That can be a differentiator for you. I saw another question about how to get artifacts. Let's see how. Once you have the evidence, the evidence might be a hard drive. You image that. Getting the artifacts is usually going to involve like maybe mounting it with a tool like FTK Image or Arsenal Image Mounter, and then you export the image that is relevant for your investigation. Or it might be that the artifact is something that you can export directly from a platform. So maybe if the artifact that's relevant for an investigation is logs related to network traffic, that could be something you export directly from like a SIM, for example. Can you think of other ways to answer that question, Abby?
It just really depends on what you're looking for, I guess. You can get them from a sim. You can get them. Yeah, I guess it depends on what you're looking for, right? Like they reside in different places, so it depends on what kind of artifacts you're looking for. Some you have to go to the registry. Some are just lying out in the users folder. Some are just like the System 32, and this is all host, right? Like for cell phone forensics, though, yeah, no, that's a whole other.
Yeah, cell phone forensics is a whole different ballgame, so to speak.
Yeah. So another question, how heavy is travel in your roles in regards to IR?
0. I have yet to travel for an IR engagement, but that's also because I'm not a consultant. If I work for an in-house incident response team, so I don't have to travel. We get all our stuff remotely. And these days, even consultants don't travel as much, but there are still situations where consultants have to travel, especially if, data restrictions, for a client involve the data not leaving a certain geo region or it can't leave the site. IR consultants might have to travel, but for me, again, I work in-house cyber incident response, so I don't have to travel. I've never traveled in the 4 years I've been at my current job. I think the most anyone on the team has traveled is maybe somebody that was living in the city. They just drove somewhere to pick up a hard drive or something like that. But no, that's also particular to my particular organization. We're set up well to not require travel for lots of things. If anything, sometimes we might ship a device, mail a device to a campus or something. But yeah, I haven't had to travel.
I've had to travel in the past for even as in-house. It was limited to maybe 2 or 3 times a year. There was cases because most organizations, or at least in my experience, the headquarters was where the examiner sat. So we worked for like corporate IT, in which case we would have to go and do the traveling to do, especially if there were super sensitive cases. Now, as a consultant, it depends, and this was long ago. It has clearly changed. You're not traveling as much, but it used to be upwards of like 60% travel. Mm-hmm. Have you taken any, or would you recommend any psychology coursework for your role? Yes. For mine, maybe not psychology, but more of like interviewing and communication and how people communicate in both body language as well as their speaking and types of terms they use, how they carry themselves, and then interviewing on how to interview and how to ask the right questions, as well as trying to break into, I guess, the person's not psyche, that kind of sounds wrong, but understanding how to ask the right questions, right? And based on what people are saying to you.
I would agree, especially if you feel like the roles you might be targeting would involve corporate investigations, interviewing subjects. Yeah. For IR, it might be less important. Like me and my team, we're not the ones interviewing subjects, but we do sometimes sit in on interviews just to provide the technical support. If the interviewer maybe doesn't have the technical background, myself, or my team members might be there. So it certainly doesn't hurt. I mean, and I, just as a side note, I feel like psychology is a fairly interesting field, even if it's not, directly related. So, it doesn't hurt. And I think I see Skylar had a question before about the harsh is no IT background. So, Skylar, did we answer the previous question about, you did some help desk work and you're currently doing IAM? Did we address that? Loss prevention.
I mean, having a help desk background is great because that's understanding, right, how to troubleshoot. That's one of the skill sets we listed. So I think one of the biggest things that people need to understand is understanding how the skills you have now translate into the career you want, right? So they are not going to match up one-to-one. Sometimes they do, but most of the times they don't. So understanding what you do now and how that translates into what the career you want is, right? So I used to work in asset management without having no technical background, but hey, that's what being a librarian is. That's what being a cataloger in a museum is. I understood databases. I never worked in anything having to do with IT, but I understood how to read a record, how to read a database, how to pull information from a database, right? How to parse that information and present it in a human readable format, right? So being able to take those skills that you currently have, whether they're your unique skills, and being able to translate that into the career you want, that's gonna help. So like I said, help desk is great. You work in IM, that's great too. You have that technical skill set, right? So being able to translate what current work you do into the career you want is golden.
Kind of as Abby was speaking, something that I would like to see. I've never seen this myself, but I think it might be helpful. Is don't rely on interviewers, on HR, people looking at resumes to make the connections between your previous experience and what you're going for. So maybe you have your resume, maybe you have a second page that's like a table, like prior skill and skill. So skill for the job you're applying for, right? So you have your skill from IAM, from help desk. You list troubleshooting applications, and then on the next column put this is the skill for this job that this would translate well into, right? Like try to make it easier for people looking at your resume, at your experience, to see the connections between what you've done and what you will hopefully be doing, right? That's something that I try to emphasize. Like I look at a lot of resumes, and people don't make it easy for me to see their value, right? You don't want the person looking at your resume or your LinkedIn to struggle to figure out how you would be a good candidate. Make it easy for them. So list out, your personal learning and what skills that developed and how that translates directly into the job you're applying for. Even if it's a job that's in an unrelated field, waiting tables or babysitting or something. If there's some skill that you feel would apply to the new job, list it there somehow. Just try to make it easy for the person looking at your resume to discern, that value from your previous experience, whatever that may be. So we went on significantly longer than we expected, I think. Any other questions? I'm good. So if people have more questions, I'm happy to answer the questions. If not, something we didn't put in our slides, but I'm more than happy for anyone to add me on LinkedIn if they want to do so. Just what I do ask is don't just send the connection request, put a message on there. It's like, we're in Raices, just because I get a lot of LinkedIn requests that either look bogus or I don't know who the heck the person is. So identify yourself. So otherwise, I'm just going to leave it there unresponded to forever.
Yeah, he didn't respond to me. I don't know. I don't know why. This nefarious character, Eric.
Yep.
Well, both of you, thank you very, very much for being here, for addressing our members, and for your outstanding talk. This is like I said at the beginning of this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I love you guys. Thank you very much for being here and for being part of this community. We need more Hispanic, Latinos, Latinas, and all our allies here in this field, because like I said, it's how we think and how we approach a different topic, in how we approach these investigations. We need diversity of thought in here. So that's very important when we're doing incident response and in forensics. So again, thank you very much for you guys being here. Please stick around. We have our Capture the Flag, which, by the way, had a lot of forensics questions in our Capture the Flag. So I'll show you guys after the presentation here. But I want to thank you guys, and I want to thank our members, and I want to thank our viewers for being here on a Saturday. So again, this concludes another Summer of Cyber series. We'll see you next Saturday.